Thank you, Dr. Greenwood. Thanks for that introduction. You actually said some nice things. I appreciate that.
You pay somebody enough money.
I know, you do. You pay him enough money. I'm sure he'll send me a bill. Are you able to hear me okay? All right, great. I'll just try to use my coaching voice then. Thanks for coming. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today and talk to you a little bit about my experiences in the field. I've had several different types of experiences. I haven't had a normal straight path through the field. I've been a strength coach, an educator, and a researcher. So I'm going to share these with you. So this is the outline I'll follow, and so you'll know where I am as we move through this, okay? So first I want you to think about who's influenced you in your life, all right? There must be at least one person, maybe two, who've influenced you in your life's direction, and how have they influenced you? I'm not going to ask you to answer that question for me. I just want you to get that in your mind, and we'll come back to it at the end. I'm a big believer in mentors. I believe that we're all a product of our experiences, and if I hadn't had mentors throughout my life, I don't think I'd be where I am now. My first mentor was my dad, okay? And he would always say, find something, work hard, and get good at it. Kind of typical dad, you know? Quick and to the point. And if I had $1 for every time he said that to me, from the time I was probably 1 year old, he would say this, I probably wouldn't have ever had to work. But it didn't work out quite that way. I did have to work. But yeah, he used to say that. And so I did find something that I thought I got pretty good at, worked hard, and that was leads me to this next part, a little bit about my experience as a student athlete. So I started playing tennis from the age of 8, and I practiced extremely hard my whole life, and it culminated, and don't boo this up, we'll come back to this, I know, big game this weekend. It culminated in a tennis scholarship at Auburn University, and I was pretty psyched to get this. I figured I'd arrived, you know, I was at the top of the mountain when I got this tennis scholarship. So I showed up there, and does anybody know what this thing is right here?
A racket?
It is a tennis racket. As a matter of fact, that's the tennis racket, not that particular one, but that was the type of tennis racket that I played with. That was the racket of the day back in the late 70s, early 80s. So we're going back a few years here. So I was doing some research last week, putting slides together, and I found these for sale on eBay. Okay, so if anybody's interested, you can pick one up. But I wouldn't recommend it. The game has changed considerably, and rackets have changed considerably. So it probably, unless you're just going to collect tennis rackets, it probably wouldn't be your best choice. So I'm digressing. Back to this. All right. So yeah, I was there. I was pretty excited about being there. But it wasn't quite working out for me. It wasn't a good fit. And for reasons I won't go into, I started to try to figure out how I could get away. And I heard a voice from another mentor who said, you should find a good mentor. This was my tennis coach, tennis pro, from the time I was little all the way up through high school. And she used to say, you need a good mentor whatever you do in life, because that person can show you the way. So I decided that I would leave where I was. I transferred schools. I found a good mentor. I transferred schools. And I was introduced to strength training. Now this was a pretty neat thing, okay? Because back then, nobody strength trained. The only people that strength trained were on the football team. Any ideas what type of strength training we might have been doing as tennis players, as female athletes in like 1980? Huh?
Football.
Football. Football strength training? Like the same program? Okay, well, good guess, but not right, okay? Anybody else want to take a stab at it? No, they're scared. Okay, that's fine. Nautilus circuits. Everybody heard of Nautilus?
Jones.
Yeah. Short rest, high volume, 8 to 12 exercises per workout, 2 to 3 sessions per week. This is what we did. This was our strength training. This was pretty novel. Okay? Tennis players didn't lift weights. Female athletes didn't lift weights at this time. So we were written up about, in the newspaper about that we were doing this. I mean, it was like, ooh, they're training with weights. This is big time. So what do you think? Did it work? Was it good? Was it bad? You all are too quiet.
Good.
Yeah, I increased strength. I increased power. My serve got better. My foot speed got better on the court. This was really good stuff. So I always tell students, have a lot of tools in the toolbox. Because everybody's always like, oh, machines, they're not good, blah, blah, blah. You know what? If you have an untrained athlete, they will get stronger and they will get more powerful with a machine. So something clicked for me. I really got interested in this. I'll be back to this point later. All right, so I was coming near the end of my tennis career, a senior, 21 years of age, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And it was at this time that I remember what a high school history teacher and my advisor used to say to me, which is find your passion and follow it. Figure out what your passion is and follow it. Kind of like my dad, find something, get good at it, work hard. Only she was a little more eloquently spoken than he is. All right, but the same theme. So at 21 years of age, what was my passion? I don't know. I was trying to figure this out. I could be a professional tennis player. A couple of people on the team were turning pro. That seemed like it might be a good way to go. There was only one problem with that. I wasn't good enough. All right, so I had to scratch that off the list. A couple of you asked questions about my English degree, so this is where this comes in. All right, so I had majored in English just because it was something to major in, and I did okay in it, so I majored in English. My parents thought law school might be a good idea, because that's what you do with an English degree. You go to law school. The problem with that is I wasn't particularly interested in that. It just wasn't a good fit for me. So I came around to, you know what I'll do? I'll teach English. This seemed like a fine idea for the short term. I could get into coaching. This could all work. All right? So that was my plan. So I took a job as a coach and an educator. It was my first job. My grandmother used to say, stay in school, get a good education. With a good education, the possibilities are limitless. She was from a generation that they didn't get to go to college. Women didn't go to college back then. Okay, they got married, had families, they did other things. So she used to tell all the grandchildren, stay in school, get an education. The possibilities will be limitless. And of her 5 grandchildren, 4 went to college, and 3 went on for higher degrees. So she was quite pleased about that. So I went back and got certified to teach. I got a job coaching and teaching. I moved to Texas. See, Texas always comes back around somehow, doesn't it? Moved to Texas, and I was coaching track, soccer, and basketball. So 3 seasons, yep, just going straight through and teaching English and teaching physical education. Didn't have enough to do, so decided that I would go back to grad school and get my master's degree. So I entered the coaching program at the University of Houston, right down the road. And 2 things happened there that would shape what I would do from this point on. One was, as part of the master's program in coaching, we were required to take exercise science classes. I had never even heard of exercise science because I'd been an English major. Got into some of these exercise science classes and just loved it. It all clicked for me. I'm like, so this is what all this is. This is how you figure out about training. This is how you write programs. This is what's going on for the body. So it was just so exciting, and I loved it. I just loved it. And the other thing that happened was there was a fellow grad student in my program who was in the coaching masters, and he was a GA with track and field. And he was also a competitive Olympic lifter. And he said, you should come to the weight room and when the track team's in lifting and see what's going on with that. So I was telling about my Nautilus experience. He's like, oh, no, 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 this is not that. This is totally different. So I found my way into the weight room and watched them do Olympic lifts. I worked with him and learned how to do the Olympic lifts. And so it all started to click even further. I'm loving this strength training. This stuff's pretty cool. Okay. So I switched from coaching to exercise science and got my master's degree. And it took a long time because I was working full time. So I'd go full time in the summers, I'd go at night, but that was fine. That was the plan all along. Now, I'm teaching, I'm learning all this great stuff. I'm seeing what's going on in the weight room for the track team at U of H. I want to apply this stuff. I want to have my athletes lift. We didn't have the best weight room. We had a universal machine. Do you all even know what a universal machine is? Does anybody know? They're not really around much anymore. All right, so we had universal machine, we had some dumbbells. That was it. Okay, no Olympic lifting platforms, no squat cages or any of that. So I thought, I'm going to have my athletes lift. I'm going to have my basketball players, my track athletes, my soccer athletes lift, because I'd seen what it did for the athletes at U of H. So I started this. However, it was met with a great deal of resistance. Now, we're into about the mid-'80s at this point, all right? I was told it's not an appropriate training activity for girls. Girls shouldn't be lifting weights. This is from the head of physical education telling me this, okay? Was also told boys don't need to lift weights unless they're playing football. Yeah. And they said, you're coaching JV soccer. I was coaching JV boys soccer. You're coaching JV soccer, so you know what? You don't need to be, you're not coaching football, so your boys don't need to be lifting. And last, we can't risk any injuries. We can't have these kids hurt. Well, I was really bummed out about this, as you could probably imagine, because I was excited about everything I'd learned, and I wanted to be able to apply these things and benefit my athletes. So at that time, we had this great guy. I loved this man. He was wonderful, Dr. B. He had been a principal in Houston Independent School District for 1,000,000 years, and he had retired. And he and I used to talk about teaching all the time and coaching, and he was a consultant at the school where I worked. So he knew I was very upset about this whole situation, and his advice to me was, pick your battles carefully. You only get so much rope before you use it up. And he would say, Margaret, this is not where you want to use your rope. You're going to have other battles to fight here, that you're not going to win this one, basically, was his advice. And, you know, I didn't like it, but I respected him, so I listened to what he had to say. And I have heard this many times throughout my career. Okay, it's probably one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten, because you will have lots of battles, and you have to know when to fight them and when not to. All right, so I'd figured out what my passion was, sports science, and education seemed like finding the answers. That's the way I was going to get the answers to everything. So I moved on and went to the University of Georgia, enrolled in the Ph.D. program in skeletal muscle exercise physiology. Okay, I'm going to come back to this too. There's a reason this is up here. So when I was at the University of Georgia, Bob Armstrong was my major professor. And he was a wonderful guy. He really was. He was a great mentor. But, you know, I'd worked hard my whole life, everything I'd ever done, and I got in this Ph.D. program, and I'm telling you, it was hard, because my undergraduate was in English, as you know by now, right? My master's was in exercise science. First year, I had to take chemistry, physics, biochemistry, calculus, all these things English majors don't take, yeah. So I remember going into his office one day, and I'm like, you know, this is really hard. I don't know if I can do this. I mean, I was getting kind of whiny. And he just looked at me, and he said, you just need to work harder. He said, just be the first one there and the last one to leave. It'll all work. It'll all fall into place for you. You can do it. And he's right, okay? It did fall into place. I did fine. I graduated from there. And he moved here and became the department chair at Texas A&M. And he's been retired for a few years from here now. So I don't know if anyone here has ever met him, but he's a terrific guy. All right, so strength coach and educator. Now I've dropped the sport coach and become the strength coach. Springfield College. Does anybody know what Springfield College is famous for? I know we're pretty far away from there. It's in Massachusetts.
Being an awesome state.
Oh, being in Massachusetts, being an awesome state. That's true. That would be. I will give you that. Anything else? There was a sport invented there. Basketball. Don't let the people at Kansas tell you otherwise, okay? Because they will. They try to claim it. They do. It was invented by Dr. James Naismith, who was on the faculty at Springfield College. Now, he did leave Springfield and go to Kansas and taught there and coached there. So they have a Naismith court. Springfield has a Naismith court, but Springfield was first. All right, just a little bit of trivia for you. All right, so I arrived here in 1995. When I got there, there was no formal strength and conditioning program, nothing. A very small room with, again, a universal machine, a couple of broken hexagonal dumbbells, and a few bars kicking around. Yeah, it was in pretty bad shape. Football team came in, whoops, sorry. All right, football team came in and lifted, some. Track athletes came in, a few field hockey players. That was it. I had no real facility to speak of, no budget, no staff, just me. Yeah, I know you're probably thinking, why'd you take that job? But we'll find out. So when I left 15 years later, the strength and conditioning program had grown to service 18 teams each semester, both men's and women's, 450 athletes each week coming through the facility. Now this is a D3 school, by the way, very different from here. To have 450 athletes lifting each week is pretty amazing for a D3 school. Program design, preseason, in-season, off-season, we did it all for the sports. Okay, so that's what it grew to. I was lucky enough to be able to design a couple of weight rooms when I was there. This was the last one. I don't know if you all can see these pictures very well, but this one opened in the fall semester of 2008, 8,500 square feet, which is a pretty good size room. Okay. And my goal from the beginning was to make a room where we could be self-contained. So if you ever design a facility or you ever have to set up a weight room, okay, you want to be able to be self-contained. You want to be able to do everything in your room. So my goal was you come in, you warm up, you do your lift, you cool down, everything happens in this room. Lots of snow and ice in Massachusetts in the winter, so we couldn't rely on going outside for conditioning. There was a track upstairs, but we couldn't rely on being able to use that. We were really low in the priority system because the sports teams would use that for indoor practicing. So we had to do it all here. Okay, so this is what it looked like. 18 platform stations, 2 dumbbell stations so that we could run more than one team at a time. If anybody wants to talk about program design, weight room design later, I'd be happy to because I do like talking about it. We created our own conditioning station with treadmills and bikes, and we had our own plyometric station over here. So we were able to do all aspects of our program in the facility. And here was the other catch. Because it was Division III, we couldn't train athletes between 8 and 3. So all training had to happen before 8 a.m. or after 3. Because between 8 and 3, classes were taught in here. So how did all this happen? Well, no budget, no academic courses to speak of when I started there, no graduate program, no personnel except for me. But I did have 2 things. I had a vision, a plan, an end game. I knew where I wanted to finish this thing up, where I wanted it to end up. And I had the support of a department chair who was a terrific individual. Okay, you always have to have someone in administration who will support you, or you're not going to be able to get things done. His name was Charlie Redmond, and he's now the dean of the School of Physical Education there, but he had been our department chair. And Charlie was a physical therapist and an athletic trainer, and he'd been in the trenches, bless you, he'd been in the trenches for years. So he understood the value of these services to athletes, and he was very supportive of it as long as I could make this argument. And he used to always say it, coaching is teaching and teaching is coaching. They're not mutually exclusive. So if you can make an argument that you're teaching, that you're bettering the student athlete, okay, again, it's Division III, not just the athlete part, he said, we can get this done. So my first rule when I started was there would be no gender bias in the weight room. All sports were treated equally. It didn't matter if you were on the football team that won the conference championship or you were on the women's cross-country team. If your team wanted to come in and lift, you would be given an opportunity. Professionalism was required or the person was sent off. Okay, this applied to athletes as well as staff. So this is where I'm going to tell you my John Cena story. Does everybody know who John Cena is? Yeah? WWE, right? Yeah. Well, John played football at Springfield. And we knew then that he was going to do something. We weren't sure what it was, but we knew he was going to go on and do something because he had quite a big presence, quite a big personality. And he would come to the weight room, and I had specific rules about what people had to do when they were in the weight room, how they had to conduct themselves. He would come in, he didn't have his shirt, so he had his shirt off. Or he had his flip-flops on because he forgot his sneakers. Or he'd be over in the corner doing bicep curls instead of in the squat rack. You know, all these things. And he and I used to have conversations about this. So finally, we came to a parting of the ways. And we decided that it would be better for John if he went and lifted in the wellness center. We had a really nice wellness center. He could go lift there, and he could do what he wanted over there. So I basically kicked him out of the weight room. Okay, and it could have been someone on the lacrosse team, and I would have done the same thing. It just happened to be John Cena. So everyone on staff, once I got a staff, was required to work with football. Didn't matter, male or female, whether you were interested in football or not, because I feel it's really important to understand how to program for football. It's a huge group of people, very heterogeneous. The positions are so different. So if you can understand how to take a large group like that and move them through a facility and program for them, then it is going to serve you well, all right, working with all sports. Also, men worked with women's sports and women work with men's sports. Okay, important because we don't coach the same way usually. You need to have lots of tools in your toolbox in order to be able to work with different people. And when people tell me, well, I'd like to hire a female in the weight room, but I can't find anybody who's good. That's just not true, okay? We're out there. We're out there. And I always, once I was able to get GAs, and it took a little while because I didn't start with them, I always had one male and one female GA on staff. And I made sure of that. Okay, and that's important too, because people learn in different ways, people connect with different people, so you want to have a balanced staff as best you can. All right, so I worked off this diagram. This is a triangle. Springfield's known for a triangle. All right, spirit on one side, mind on one side, body on the other. So I like that idea. I like how it flows from the 3 points. So I drew this out. First, I was going to work with athletics, okay? Get the program design and implementation set. Like I told you, no one had really worked with them. People just kind of went in the weight room and did whatever. All right, so I started writing lots of programs and getting it set for different sports. At the same time, I developed a master's program in strength and conditioning because I knew that I needed help. You know, it was just me. And if I could get some students in there, then they would, that were interested in this, then they would be able to help and be part of the staff. We also developed an undergraduate specialization. So what I did is I developed an internship program. Everybody in the master's program and in the undergraduate specialization were required to do an internship in the weight room. Okay? And the ones that got better and liked it and were good and interested, they then were able to get possibly earn a GA position as a grad student. We also had laboratory courses and research opportunities for grad students in athletics. So that was part of that. The third piece in this was the scholarship. It's hard to see that down here. It's kind of dark, but it says scholarship, established research agenda, developed strength lab. This was the last thing to fall into place in the 15 years I was there. I really wanted us to have our own strength lab so that we could do research related to strength and sports performance and sports science, all those questions that I'd had for so many years. So the idea would be that grad students and undergrads would be able to do a thesis, an independent study, or some sort of senior research project in the strength lab. And then with that information that we found out, the questions we answered, we'd be able to improve our programming to the athletes. We'd be able to design better programs and also conduct educational seminars for coaches. So that was the model that I worked off of, and it took a long time to get that developed. Okay? It was not an overnight situation. So where are all these people now? Well, you know, I started to say where are these kids now, but a lot of them aren't kids anymore. They've been out a while. And they're working as strength coaches all over the place. But they're in the major college conferences. They're also in professional sports. I mean, several are in the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NHL. One works for USA Rugby. A lot of them are employed in the private sector, and they're very successful with their own businesses in the private sector. And then some of them are in the more minor college conferences, so they're everywhere as strength coaches, okay, men and women. When I was setting all this up, I used to go and hear Mike Boyle. How many of you have heard of Mike Boyle? Anybody here ever heard of him? Check him out if you haven't. If you're interested in performance and sports and strength and conditioning, you need to check him out. He's written a bunch of books. He's done DVDs, he's got a website. He is an excellent strength coach. And he was right down the road in Boston at the time. So I used to hear him speak all the time. And one of the things I like that he always would say is read 30 minutes every night. The more you know, the less you know. And it's so true, okay? So even though I'm doing all this work and programming and, you know, teaching classes and all this, I would always try to do this. And I still do this. I drive in traffic all the time in the DC area. It's brutal. It's really bad. And so I don't read because I'm driving, but I'll listen to podcasts in the car. All right, so you can always learn something new. And as I was thinking about that and reading and thinking about what Mike said, I really wanted to move away from coaching and get more into the research side because I had so many questions that I wanted to answer. So this comes to my last part, okay, which is where I am now at George Mason University, which is in the DC area. And after 15 years at Springfield, I just felt like I was ready for some new challenges and some new opportunities. So I traded my coach hat for a research hat. So I'm not coaching anymore. I do sports science research, I do some teaching, and I oversee the kinesiology program. So I'm in Kines. I work with the Center for Sports Performance, which is our research sports lab, sports science lab for our athletes. And then I'm part of another research group called the SMART Lab. So this is what I do. All right, this is my research diagram. Up top here, resistance, exercise, and power development. This goes all the way back to those days of Nautilus, when I wanted to know, how is this working? All right. So all of this research is sports science based. A lot of it is field based, okay? I have 3 lines of inquiry. The first one, assessment of strength and power for performance-based fitness. So I've worked with Division I athletes, Division III athletes. I've worked with athletic youth throughout the world. I've been able to live in England and do some work there, some work in Spain, some work in Asia. Basically collecting data at these different levels and looking at, you know, what's a good strength level, what's a good power level for, depending on the level at which you're participating. Second line of inquiry is modalities, protocols, and techniques for strength and power development. And this is the fun one because I look at all these cool things, okay? We've done studies where we've looked at bands and chains. Everybody know what I'm talking about when I talk about bands and chains? All right. We've looked at whole body vibration, done some work with that. And those are all considered modalities or techniques. If you can find a way to make someone stronger and more powerful in a faster way, if you can save time, then you know what, you're on to something. So all these kind of deal with that. Also circuit and cluster training and tempo training, those are all playing around with program design and rest periods within workouts. We've done some work with that. And currently, we are doing work looking at the Myo Test and the Tendo unit. Does anybody know what the Myo Test is? I find that that's one people aren't so sure about. It's about the size, it's a little smaller than your hand. It's about this big. Looks like a little iPod. And you're able to wear it on a belt, and you can jump and get measures of power and force with it. It's pretty neat. And then lastly would be intervention strategies for injury reduction. As a strength coach, you always want to try to reduce injury for your athletes and maximize performance. And we've done some studies where we've looked at what if you back squat versus split squat? Is it equally effective? Do you see the same endocrine responses? Some of those types of studies we've done. And I'm going to talk about a few of my studies here that deal with mood state. I've become very interested in how the psychological and the physiological tie in together. And I think some of that may go back to those Springfield days of spirit, mind, and body. I'm not sure. All right, so I'm going to talk about 3 studies because I promised Dr. Greenwood I would talk about some research. Okay, so get on the edge of your seat because this is going to be good stuff. All right, this first one is mood state changes during preseason in NCAA Division III women's volleyball. All right. So mood state has been shown to change in response to different training stimuli. Okay, athletes rate their mood. It goes up and down with the training stimuli. Okay, we also know that performance level is affected by how much volume, how much training volume you do, and the intensity of that training volume. So this led us to the purpose of this study, which was to investigate whether or not changes occur in lower body power or mood state over the course of a 10-day preseason period in collegiate volleyball athletes. Okay, those of you that have played sports, you know that you train, you get ready in the off season, preseason comes, and no matter how hard you've worked, you're not ready, are you? Preseason is always just like wham, right there, okay? It's much more intense. So I wanted to see how this affected these athletes. So we had 15 athletes. Here's all of their physical characteristics right here, okay? Now, 14 days of preseason. In this 14-day period, they got 2 days off. That was it. They trained twice a day for volleyball from 9 to 11 in the morning and from 7 to 9 at night. And they had an afternoon training session, either lifting or agilities. So they were training 3 times a day. Now, oftentimes, this night session would be more of a strategy session. But still, high volume. Okay. So what we did is we would go into the 9 a.m. training session, warm them up with some dynamic flexibility. We had 3 stations. One station was a pencil paper station where we gave them the brief assessment of mood and these 2 others. The brief assessment of mood is an abbreviated PALMS. Everybody here ever heard of the profile of mood state? Have you learned about that in any of your classes? Maybe not. Okay, well, it would be like a sports psych thing. And what the brief assessment of mood, or the BAM, is reduced to 6 things that the athletes have to rate: depression, tension, anger, confusion, fatigue, and vigor. They rate how they're feeling about those things right at that moment when they're filling it out. Okay. In addition to that, we did the 3-step approach vertical jump. That's what this is a picture of. It's kind of dark, but you could see we have the vertex here, and she's coming in approaching. So she's not jumping off 2 feet. She's taking a 3-step approach. And then we used the Myo Test. And for the Myo Test, it was from 2 feet, 5 vertical jumps, as high as you could jump. Boom, 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 in succession. Okay. So what did we find? Well, let me back up for 1 second to this BAM again. Typically with athletes, you won't see much in terms of depression or confusion or tension unless there's something else going on for them. But what you will see is fatigue and vigor and anger. Those will change substantially. So this graph has the 8 days that we were able to collect data out of the 10-day period. And the score, 0 means that there was nothing, 4 would have been the highest. Okay, so fatigue is the yellow curve, and you could see the fatigue climb steadily over till it was the highest. It was significantly higher here than any other day. So over the course of the time, they were becoming fatigued. All right, think about what they were doing. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Vigor or energy was falling. So again, this is significant right here. It was at the lowest point in the period, was in day 8. Okay, so significant changes. Anger didn't change, but significant changes in fatigue and vigor. Here's our measures of lower body power. The first one is the 3-step approach jump right here. And you could see there's a little dip down, but for the most part, this didn't change. This was not significant. I just put it down here. It says 10% decrease. Okay, because it was a 10% decrease. It was not statistically significant. But if your vertical jump is 22 inches and you have a 10% decrease, how much have you lost on your vertical jump? 2 inches, right? So as a coach, would you be concerned if your athletes are losing 2 inches on their vertical jump? Yeah. It might not be statistically significant, but it is going to affect their performance. So I put it up there to talk a little bit about what I call coaching significance versus statistical significance. What we did see with the 5 counter movement vertical jump test, these were significantly higher on day 1 and 2, and it just continued to fall over preseason. So what do we conclude? I found this to be very interesting. Changes in mood state accompanied by changes in tests of lower body power. So this decrease in the 5 counter movement vertical jump is probably a result of the high training volume they were doing, although we don't know for sure. And mood state may give us some information as to how an athlete's adapting to load and volume. Okay, so I think it's good to look at this. When we're teaching people exercises, we talk about progressing an exercise, making an exercise more difficult. Okay, if you come in and you start with dumbbell bench, all right, or maybe you start with dumbbell incline, I don't know, and then you progress to heavier barbell bench, for example. That might be a way to progress an exercise. Research, you progress as well. Okay, you ask that question, you get results, you come up with another question, and you just follow it out. Okay, so I was very interested in what I saw with the mood, and I wanted to look at this in more depth than a 2-week window. So at George Mason, I was lucky enough to be able to work with women's basketball, and we followed them out throughout their preparatory and competitive training periods. Okay, so we had a 9-week preparatory period that consisted of off-season training as well as preseason before the start of season, and then we had their competitive training period right here. Okay, and so we followed them for 20+ weeks, and we looked at peak power, vertical jump, and mood state. 14 total athletes, 14 basketball players. Here's their information up here, all right, physical characteristics. 7 starters and 7 non-starters. So every week on Friday, they would come into the little lab, and they would fill out the BAM for me, which takes about 20 seconds, and then I would have them do a vertical jump test on a force platform. I have a portable force platform, which is kind of neat. It's like those, it's on wheels, so you can move it around. And I put the vertex up above the force platform so that when they jumped, they had a target to jump to, okay? So I was collecting vertical jump and power from the force platform as well as vertical jump from the vertex. All right, so this shows, and again, it seems like it's a little dark, but hopefully you all can see this okay. This is the percent change in peak power over the whole training cycle. So the dark graph, the green is starters, the gold is non-starters. This is our off-season down here. So this was like from the end of August until early October. This is from early October until the first game, so that's preseason. And then here's our in-season period. 0 would be, this is expressed in terms of percent change. So this would be how much your peak power changed in percent. So week 1 would be your baseline measure. And so it would be here, all right? And then how did your values change in respect to that? So first of all, we didn't see any difference in starters and non-starters, even though it looks like it from this. Statistically, it wasn't significant, okay? What we did see, though, for all of them, is everybody improved their peak power at week 6. So the off-season training worked, basically is what that says, okay? And then we didn't see any further changes. I mean, we saw a lot of up and down throughout the training cycle, but we didn't see any further changes in power. So it was as good as it got right here at week 6. However, we saw some interesting things with the BAM, and this is why I'm glad we looked at this. So like I told you, they filled that out every Friday morning before they jumped. Here we have differences between starters and non-starters. So the starters in green were perceiving fatigue much more than the non-starters were, which might make sense, I guess, especially once you got into season where they were playing more. Okay. So you can't really see these guys very well. Sorry about that. This looked great at home. But these significant here, 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 and here. All right. So week 7, 11, 16, and 18, significant differences between the starters and the non-starters in terms of ratings of fatigue. So what do we make of all this? Well, there was a study done at the University of Texas with women's soccer where they looked at power during the sports season. Now, we looked at it through sports season, but also preseason and off-season. They looked at it over the sports season, and they found that power declined in soccer starters. In our study, both the starters and the non-starters experienced a gain in power up to week 6, and then once in-season started, preseason and in-season started, there were no further gains. However, the starters reported higher ratings of fatigue and lower vigor ratings. I didn't put a vigor graph up here, but vigor went down, fatigue went up, just like with the volleyball players. Much higher compared to the non-starters during preseason and in-season. So once again, I think we could conclude from this that use of the BAM can provide information unavailable through physical testing measures. So it's nice to look at that other little piece of information. I think it could give a coach some very useful information for training. No significant changes were observed in our Vertec measures. Okay, yeah, we saw it go up and down, but statistically, no statistical significance with the Vertec, where they were going up and tapping the Vertec. Same thing as with the volleyball study. Okay. So I have one more study I want to talk to you about, okay, and then I'll finish up. So in our lab, in our sports performance lab, we have a bod pod, and I put all the athletes in. I realized today I was talking all about female athlete data. I do have data on male athletes too. It just worked out that way. But we put all of them in, and I give the body composition data, the fat and the fat-free mass data, to the strength coaches, and they're able to use that for program design, okay, and see how the athletes are responding. I also, if we've had someone who's injured, I give that information, the body composition information, to the athletic trainers. We're all right there together. So we work well together, which is nice. That's the key, is to have a good staff, okay, where everybody works together. So because I'm doing all this, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to look at differences in body composition across sport? So I took this is all women's sports, basketball, lacrosse, soccer, and volleyball. And I wanted to see, do you see differences in fat, body fat, and fat-free mass across sport? And do you see differences across sport position? So here are the physical characteristics of all the athletes. Basketball, lacrosse, soccer, volleyball, right here. Okay, age, height, mass, and percent body fat. So first thing we found is that the basketball players are significantly lower in body fat than the other 3 sports. You might expect that, you might not. 20.5% was the average for them. Okay, so that was one thing. Basketball and volleyball players were significantly taller than lacrosse and soccer. Again, lacrosse and soccer are field sports. Height is not necessarily a requirement for some of those positions the way it is for basketball and volleyball, so you would probably expect they would be taller. And basketball and volleyball players were significantly heavier. They were taller, they were heavier. But what I find of interest is, yes, basketball was taller and heavier, but they were also lower in body fat. So these basketball athletes had the highest fat-free mass. Okay, they were, of the 4 sports, these were the ones that were jacked, as they say, okay? So let's look at body fat by basketball position. There are no real centers anymore, so they're either forwards or guards. And you could see that the forwards were significantly higher than the guards. They were coming in somewhere in the low 20s, and the guards were coming in about in the mid-teens, okay, in terms of body fat. So that was the breakdown for basketball. I don't know if you all have lacrosse out here or not. No? Lacrosse? Sorry?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay. Well, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, lacrosse is similar to soccer in that the field is the same size and the positions are very similar. Just put forward here instead of attack, and basically you've got the same positions. But they sometimes call it basketball on a stick because the movements are very similar to what's required for basketball. Cutting, dodging, setting picks, that sort of thing. All right, so what we found across position here is that attack and midfield had significantly less body fat than defense and goalkeepers. Would make sense. They do more of the movement, all right? If you ever watch lacrosse, the goal is small. It's not like a soccer goal. I mean, it's probably only about this big. So the goalkeepers are huge, both in the men's and the women's games, because you want them to fill up that goal so that you have very little space to shoot in. Okay. So that's not surprising that they might carry a little more body fat as well. Interesting thing with volleyball, no significant difference across position in volleyball for body fat. They were all the same. Where we did see, and I'll talk about that a little more in a minute, where we did see some interesting differences is the defensive specialists, the libreros, were the shortest. What's the librero do, or the defensive specialist? Does anybody know? In volleyball?
Dig the balls.
Yeah, they do all the running around, okay, basically on the back row, digging the balls out. Yeah. So they were the shortest, and the middle blockers were the tallest, okay, of the 4 positions, and also significantly heavier than the DSLs. What's the middle blocker do? What do you think? Well, they're the big ones that jam up the middle. Okay? Because if I take my biggest people, as long as they can jump, if I take my biggest people and I put them in the middle, where do you have to shoot now? To the side, right? And so now you've got an extreme angle you have to deal with, and it's much more difficult. So you always want your middle blockers to be good size. For that reason, it makes it harder for the opponent. So what do we conclude from all of this? Well, basketball, sport-specific movement patterns favor athletes with low % body fat. A lot of cutting, stopping, changing direction in basketball. It would make sense that they would carry less body fat, right? Volleyball requires similar sport skills across position. Therefore, % body fat may be less of a factor on sport performance. It's a small court. You're only on one side of the court, aren't you? And if you can jump, it doesn't matter how much body fat you're carrying around, and the net is a fixed height. So the body fat is not so much an issue for volleyball, okay? Basketball and volleyball athletes were more similar in body physique compared to field sport. Again, you probably would expect that. Everything is up here for that game. It's a vertical game, whereas the field games are not. So we would probably expect that. In lacrosse, positions of midfield and attack cover the most distance in the game. Lots of starting, stopping, and cutting. Therefore, that would favor having a lower % body fat as well. So some takeaway points for you. I made a little list, okay? And I tried to put some points in from my coaching years as well as from research. So first thing, highly skilled athletes don't equal highly trained athletes. You always hear that, but you know what? It's really true. You might get that top prospect in the weight room who is just a phenomenal volleyball player or basketball player, but they are just like they have 2 left feet in the weight room. Okay, so don't assume because they're highly skilled that they're highly trained. They aren't. Okay? Talent will always play. Yeah, John Cena was a good example of that. You know, I kicked him out. He went to the wellness center, but was he on the field every Saturday starting? Sure he was, because he was really good. So talent's always going to play, unless they're hurt. The strength coach knows first. The strength and conditioning program, the off-season program, is our in-season as strength coaches. It's the sport off-season, but it's our in-season. So we get a pretty good idea of how the team is going to be next year. Because we see, are they working together well in the weight room? You know, is there leadership? If they're gelling well and they're having a great off-season, then chances are they're going to be successful on the field, barring injury or some other kind of strange circumstance. Women athletes can do pull-ups. Don't let them tell you they can't. They can, okay? I've had several that could even do pull-ups with weight belts on. You know, so yes. And male athletes can improve their flexibility. Don't let them tell you they can't, because they can. It just takes some work, but it can happen for some of them. I found 3-week training phases to work the best. Okay, I found when I did 4- and 5-week phases, it was too long, and I always ended up redoing them. And anything under 3 was not enough. So a 3-week, for me, that's just my experience, a 3-week training phase was the best. As I mentioned a little bit about this, I found that unilateral and bilateral exercises are equally effective. Okay, we saw similar gains in strength with both, similar hormone releases with both. So you don't have to just back squat. Okay, you can get strong doing split squats and stagger squats and all the different single leg variations. Consider the use of psychological measures. I think the BAM is great. It's, like I said, 20 seconds to administer that. It'll give you an extra piece of information. And I didn't talk about this, but I wanted to throw it out here because it's important, I think. When you're testing your athletes, when you're doing assessment of your athletes, think about using the standing long jump, okay? It seems to be that most athletes, at least in my experience, they are better at this than they are at this. They have to be taught to jump off of 2 feet. It's not a normal, I mean, if you think about sport, when do you jump like this? It doesn't happen very often. Maybe a block in volleyball, but usually we're taken off of 1 foot. Okay, so the standing long jump I found has a better correlation to strength than the vertical jump, and it was just less technique. It was easier to teach. All right, I'll leave you with some of mine now, all right? And my students hate hearing me say these things over and over, but that's okay. Don't reinvent the wheel. The wheel was invented a long time ago. It works just fine as a wheel, okay? You don't need to redo the wheel. You might want to fine-tune the wheel, or maybe you make a better wheel. But don't start from scratch, okay? Work on the wheel and improve the wheel. Always have a plan B, okay? And I'm thankful that I always have had a plan B, because lots of times plan A isn't going to work, and in the heat of the moment is not when you want to be scrambling around trying to find plan B. Okay, you just have it ready. And then lastly, pay it forward. I've been very fortunate, the students that I've worked with over the years, and graduate students especially, they'd say, you know, what can I do to repay you? Thank you for everything you've done. And I would say, don't do anything for me. Help the next person out. You're going to be in a position to help someone. So pay it forward. And that's what I ask you to do. That's how you pay me back. Okay. So I really wanted to talk about the importance of mentors. Hopefully I've gotten you to think a little bit about mentors in your life and you know, who's helped shape you thus far in your journey. Okay. I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by some pretty good people. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
It's a pretty quiet crowd in there.
They are quiet.
It's not even midterm yet. Go ahead, Chelsea.
What was the most challenging sport for you to work with, to program for?
Football.
Just because of the number of athletes, or?
When I first started there, it was me, and I dragged in like someone who was breathing on the street to help me, all right? So it was challenging because of the number, and being female as well, and not having played football, to get them to listen to me, it was fine. That was a stumbling block initially. But basically, it's the numbers and the different positions. It's pretty involved, the programming for that. The next one, the second most difficult, I found track and field like throwers and sprinters and jumpers, because they qualify in different times in the season, so you have to peak them differently. And if someone's already qualified, then they can train differently. But if this person hasn't qualified and you really want them to qualify, then you've got to, they might be in a taper mode. So you've just got all kinds of balls in the air with track and field. So that was always a challenge. But if you can understand how to program for track, you'll understand programming. It's pretty amazing.
I think you brought up a good point, though, too, the evolution of females into the strength and conditioning world, how that interests, we're still dealing with some of that in some geographical locations, but it has improved. I know my master's in strength and conditioning, my females were hired before my males were, but they were highly qualified. They were very well prepared, and that makes a big difference. And that's one of the biggest things I've seen in that field. You're always going to deal with, and that's the question I would have. You're dealing with a male coach, athletic coach, and you as a female strength coach, how'd that work out?
Pick your battles carefully, all right? Coaching is teaching, teaching is coaching. Educate them and let a lot of things roll off.
There's a trust factor there that's developed over time, right? And,
yes, and the football coach, after he got to know me and I knew him, we worked real well together. It was just initially, it was a challenge for both of us. Yeah.
And ultimately, if you know that you're all in the same game together trying to improve the athletes, that you're all on the same team. So.
Exactly.
When you did your, I'm actually taking over for the students' questions right now. When you did your body comp testing with different teams, did you also look at dietary food logs to find out what their nutritional intake was?
We have a sport nutritionist or sports dietitian who works with the teams, and so she sort of operates on her own, with that. So
it'd be nice to correlate what you did with that information if you have it.
Yeah.
That's another,
we do have the study that we did together with the nutritional surveys,
right.
but I don't have intake logs, no.
Is that combination, that correlation between their body mass and fat mass with their nutrition may have a bearing? I think it would have a strong bearing in that. So.
Yeah.
Chelsea, two questions.
Another question for you. What's your, I know you're in a different role now. When you were at Springfield, what was your relationship with the athletic training department in terms of sports medicine and how you communicated with them? If an athlete was coming into your weight room injured, was that something that you were aware of straight away, or?
There were several athletic trainers there, so some were excellent to work with, and others not so much so. But like with football, the athletic trainer who worked with football, he was terrific because he would just give us the list of who was injured, and then we would modify the exercises, and he trusted us. Going back to your bit about the trust factor, so he trusted us to modify the programs. Instead of trying to totally take over and say, none of this, none of this, none of this, he would just say, here's the issue. But it took time to get to that point. And then there were some athletic trainers that wanted to have more control over it. So that was always a little bit of a challenge for us.
Were you involved with the return to play kind of programming, or is that something that came from athletic trainers?
Yeah, we worked together on that, definitely. We tried to be in communication all the time. It's just important to talk. Okay, I can't stress that enough. Yes?
How often do you use the BAM survey, and what do you do with the data?
Okay.
So for example, if you're noticing that one of your athletes is depressed, what actions do you take? How do you address that with your athletes?
Yeah, the sports psychologist gets involved. We have a plan if I see that. And, we haven't. I haven't seen that. I've been pretty lucky in that way. So, but we do have a mechanism in place. And that's a great question because, you don't want to wait till that happens to figure out you've got to have plan B, So.
Do you think the diurnal secretion in cortisol had any negative impact on your BAM scores?
Well, I hadn't thought about it that way. It's a good question. We always tested them at the same time. So that we controlled for. I'm not sure. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you.
The best question that was asked Jeremy Carter asked 3 questions. And the third question was,
He's gone.
yeah, he had to go to another appointment, but do you realize that the first person that was accused of being a witch in 1486 was Margaret Jones?
In the state of
In the
Massachusetts.
state of Massachusetts,
Yeah.
So Jeremy's got too much time on his hands, I guess.
So I told him that obviously this career isn't going to work out for him. He can go and work for Ancestry.com. He's all set.
And then when he found out about her plane being late, Dr. Jones said, yeah, my broom was in the shop, so.
Yeah, so I couldn't fly here the way I normally would.
But anyway, I know time is up, but we appreciate your time today, and have a good rest of your week.